The cell cycle and mitosis. Think of the cell cycle as the life cycle of the cell. Okay, just like you have a life cycle, you're born, you become a boy or a girl, a teenager, an adult, an old person, then you die. Same thing happens with cells. They have a life cycle. Now, when you're thinking about mitosis, you're going to be thinking about that part of the life cycle that has to do with cell division. Okay, and we'll see in a little bit that the cell cycle has a stage called interphase where a cell is doing its cellular processes. Okay, it's doing what that cell's supposed to do, and mitosis, which is going to be that part of the cell cycle where the cell needs to divide. Now, let me give you a little more context here, and this has to do with what I was talking about in my previous video. Each cell, doesn't matter what cell, skin cell, liver cell, muscle cell, neuron, all of your cells, ladies and gentlemen, contain all of the genetic information that makes up an organism, that makes up you. So all of your cells have the same DNA, whether it is a stomach cell, liver cell, neuron, etc. Okay. Now, this collection or the organism's complete set of DNA is going to be called your genome. Okay, a genome. And make sure you know that word. The genome is an organism's complete set of DNA. Okay, so now not all the genetic information, not only, so every cell has not only all the information that it needs, okay, but also that of the entire organism needs. So like I was saying, and I'm sorry for this sentence piece a little bit redundant. What this means is that all of your cells, whether it's going to be a stomach cell or it's going to be a skin cell, okay, they're all going to have, all of them have the same amount of DNA, all of the same DNA. The difference is they're going to be probably expressing different genes and sometimes at different times. So for example, think of it like this. Think of it like this. Think of a book. Okay? Think of just think of a biology book, right? In a biology book, you have like 20 chapters, right? But if you are taking a specific course, okay, then you're probably going to be using only 8 chapters. If you're taking another biology course, you may use the same book and you may use 8 different chapters, okay? But still, what you have in front of you is a biology book with all of the information. Does that make sense? Think of it like that. That's what it means. Every single cell in your body has all of your genetic information, okay? Whether it's a stomach cell, a skin cell, a neuron, they all have all of the DNA that makes you. Okay, but they're probably going to be expressing different genes or expressing them at different times or in different patterns. So depending on what type of cell it is, okay, stomach, skin, liver, etc., not all information may be used. Why not? Well, for example, the stomach cell, one of its major functions, or certain types of stomach cells, one of their major functions is to make acid. Well, obviously, you don't want a neuron to start making acid, right? You don't want a skin cell to start making more acid than it has to. So you see, depending on what kind of cell, even though they have all the information, it's only going to use certain information to meet its function. There's 2 major functional cells, or cells do mostly 2 types of things. One, conduct metabolic activities, okay? The metabolic phase is usually referred to as interphase. So interphase, a cell is being what a cell does. A cell is doing a specific function. It's doing a lot of metabolic activities. In other words, it's doing a lot of different reactions, right? It's making new proteins. It's going through, for example, cellular respiration. It's probably going through photosynthesis if it's a plant cell. Okay, that's what it means by metabolic activities. It's doing we're supposed to do, okay? Either making proteins, doing chemical reactions, to going through cell respiration, etc. Okay, that is considered metabolic activities. The other major function of cells is to divide. And this reproductive phase is referred to as mitosis. Okay, like I said before, mitosis have to do with cell division. And this is a cell cycle. Cell cycle is composed of mainly two big phases: interphase, which again is where all cellular activities usually occur, that period where cellular activities are occurring, okay, when a cell is doing its function, and the mitotic phase, where the cell is going to divide. Okay, interphase has three phases, and I'm going to do this in Roman numerals, that way we can have a little bit of a distinction here. Interphase is made of a G1 phase, okay, a growth phase one. Is going to go through another phase called S phase, okay, and is going to go through a second gap or growth phase, growth number two, G2 phase, okay, where the cell is going to get ready to start dividing. So it's going to do all these check marks. It's going to be kind of getting ready, producing the organelles needed to make two different cells. Okay, so in G1, what do you have? Cells is doing their major functions. It's doing it's division. It's not division. Sorry. It's doing the cellular processes. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, that's usually G1, where a cell is being going through cell respiration, etc. G2 is very important, and we'll talk about it in a second in more detail. The S phase, okay, is S for synthesis. DNA synthesis and chromosome duplication. Here is when we make more DNA, when we synthesize more DNA, when we make a copy, we make a copy of your DNA. And why do we go through that? Why do cells have to go through that? Because they need to be able to divide. Remember, the daughter cells are going to look genetically identical to the parent cell. So we have to make two copies of DNA so each copy can land into each of the daughter cells. The G2 phase is going to be mostly just getting ready. We're about to start dividing. Cells about to start dividing, so it needs to have everything ready. All the organisms, all the organelles have to be produced and everything to just be able to divide it into two. Okay, and then finally we have the mitotic phase, and usually the mitotic phase, here's where we see the process of mitosis, which is nuclear division of the nucleus, and another one called cytokinesis, which is division of the cytoplasm. So cytoplasmic, let's just say cytoplasmic division. Okay, we're going to be dividing cytoplasm between two cells. We're going to be dividing the organelles between two cells, and these two occurs in the mitotic phase. Okay, so again, interphase, the first part of the cell cycle. The second part is going to be the mitotic phase. In interphase, we have G1, which is growth, the first gap, called one phase. And here a cell is doing what a cell is supposed to do, it's doing the cellular functions, is going through chemical reactions, etc. The S phase is when we're making new DNA. We're synthesizing a copy of the DNA because the cell is going to be about to divide. G2, we make the cell is ready to start dividing. Make sure everything is ready for division. And mitotic phase is where the cell will divide. And here we have two processes, one called mitosis, which is nuclear division, and cytokinesis, which is cytoplasmic division. Okay, make sure you pause this Pause this because I'm about to erase this. Now I want to explain really quick the importance of the S phase. I told you that the S phase, what happens in the S phase is we make a copy of the DNA, or your DNA gets duplicated. So the S phase DNA, okay, gets duplicated. We make another copy of the DNA. Now, why do we need this? Well, I want you to focus now, guys, on the cells and the chromosomes. This is a parent cell. This is a parent cell. As you can see, it has its chromosome. Okay, I'm going to put this here. I'm going to do this chromosome. Okay, it has one copy of the chromosome. By the way, this is just an example. Depends on one organism, and I'll show you a graph later on. Depends on the organism. The organism's going to have more or less chromosomes, okay? But this is just an imaginary organism that has only one chromosome. And it's just going to make it easier as we see the whole process, as we see the copying and the duplication of the DNA. So this cell starts with one chromosome. Then we go through the S phase. We're going to be making a copy of the DNA. Now look what happens here. How many chromosomes do we have? Well, actually, we're still going to have one chromosome. Okay, and this is going to make more sense a little later on, but just bear with me right now. It still has one chromosome, but now we have two copies of DNA. So we're usually going to call this sister chromatid. So this is one sister chromatid. It's going to be another sister chromatid. Okay, and this is a C. Okay, sister chromatids. When you hear sister chromatids, you're going to know that the DNA has been duplicated. Okay, it's still one chromosome. Why is it one chromosome? Because you will see here, we'll talk about this little structure here, this little circle over here, there's going to be a centromere. And the way you count chromosomes is you count the number of centromeres. Centromere is going to be a structure that is going to bring two sister chromatids together. So because there is only one centromere, you know you only have one chromosome. Okay? But since you have a centromere and you have one chromosome, but since this cell has already gone through the S phase or was going through the S phase, now we're going to be seeing two sister chromatids. Still one chromosome. In the G2 phase, here we're getting ready, right? So we don't see a change here. But then what happens? Then we go through cell division. Each cell, each daughter cell, I'm going to put here P for parent cell. Each daughter cell now is going to have to look genetically identical to the parent cell. So it needs to have its own exact copy of the parent cell. So now what's going to happen is, because we have this chromosome here with two sister chromatids, eventually what's going to happen, and bear with me, is, let me see if I can do this in the nicest way possible. I'm trying to be very, very careful with this. Probably not the best. Probably not the best picture. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. What's going to happen? There you go. That kind of looks good. You see how I split this chromosome in the middle? Well, what's going to happen is this chromosome is going to go to this place, to that pole. This one's going to go to that pole. Eventually, we're going to be making two cells. And now, okay, each daughter cell, so these are going to be the two different cells. It's going to be the two different cells in a little bit as we divide. Now, as they divide, look what happens. These daughter cell here gets one copy of the chromosome, one sister chromatid. Now we call it a chromosome. Once a chromosome has been split, or the sister chromatids have been split, now they become chromosomes. And this other daughter cell here has its own chromosome. Okay, and then here is the cell. Well, actually, this is a different phase, but we'll talk about it in a second. But you see how each of these daughter cells, now that they're daughter cells, are independent cells, they have the same copy of DNA as the parent cell. Okay, the reason why they have the same copy of DNA, the reason why these two daughter cells look genetically identical is because this parent cell, okay, we had to duplicate its DNA, and it's going to give up its copy to each of the daughter cells, and the daughter cells are going to have the same DNA as the parent cell. Okay. Now, in some cases, some cells do go through a phase called the GO phase. Okay, the G0 phase, usually call it. Now, a good example of these cells are going to be, for example, your neurons, uh, your muscle cells. Okay. Most of these cells, what's going to happen is once they kind of exit, okay, the cell cycle, and they technically never divide again. Okay, that's what GO really means. It's going to be that cycle when after you produce them, they leave the life cycle, okay, and they don't duplicate again. Okay, so all those neurons, those muscle cells, the cells in your heart, for example, they're there already, okay, and they're not gonna be reproducing. That's why when you have uh, sort of trauma in your brain or your spinal cord, it's really hard to heal because these cells do not tend to divide all the time. Okay, and usually what happens is you have to go through some type of therapy where you probably insert some kind of stem cells that hopefully can be able to compensate for the lost neurons that in some cases, but then they have to figure out the whole circuitry. So it's more complicated than you think it is. But anyway, these cells, okay, don't let me go into a tangent here. These cells, the cells that go through the GO phase, neurons, muscles, for example, they tend not to divide anymore. And whatever you have, you'll have for the rest of your life. But most other cells, for example, and an example of a cell that would go through this is probably going to be your skin cells. They divide all the time. Okay, your stomach cells, they divide all the time, so they have to go through interphase, mitosis very often, then again interphase, then mitosis very often. Stomach cells, for example, they usually we usually replace those cells every 3 days, so they have to go through mitosis very frequently.